What's up, everybody? Svenddiesel here, Sportsman's Warehouse. We're going to be tying the Bionic Ant. This is a super effective pattern of Lance Egan's. Let's go ahead and get started through the material list. We're going to be using a TMC 101 in a size 14. I also fish these down to 18s, and I've tried them on curved hooks as well. For the thread, we're going to be using black. This is a UTC 70 denier thread. And next, we're going to be also tying in some of these foam cylinders. This is the main portion of the body. This is 1/8 inch. You want to size it in appropriate proportions with the hook you're going to be using. And for the rubber legs, we're going to be using some of these black barred in size medium. They may be a little bit big, but make it a little bit easier to tie in. And for the wing, we're going to be using this parapost. You can also use brighter colors. And for the cement, we're going to be using some z-ment by Wapsi. And for this, we've just chosen a brown Hackle. I also use black and have found both to be equally effective. And so let's go ahead and get started. First, we're going to start our thread right behind the hook eye with some nice securing wraps, and I'm going to take that tag end and just run it on the underside, partially back. And we're only going to be using about half the shank here. And so we're just going to cover our thread down to the half, back over itself a few wraps. And this is just to lay down a nice thread base to tie that foam onto. Now I want the foam to extend beyond the hook bend, roughly the hook gap. And then I'm going to kind of zigzag through this foam here and being careful not to cut it. And then I'll just use some nice securing wraps. That way we're using a thinner thread, and so by wrapping over our previous wraps, we're not going to be cutting that foam. And then I'll trim the head to be just roughly, I guess if you're using proportions, it's a hook gap that extends up. And so then we will be pretty much done with our foam. And so the next step is I'm going to be tying in my rubber legs, and I'm just going to have a tag end coming off the back. I'm going to do about 3 to 4 wraps up the shank of the hook, position it where I want it, and then I'll curve this rubber leg around to the other side. And this is just to utilize all our material. You can cut another leg and tie it in as well. But I really like these rubber legs. They're super durable. They add a little bit more weight than some of the like the original pattern calls for. He used more of a silly leg or a floss leg. But these just, it's a lot easier for beginner to tie in. And I like the presentation it gives. And so that's what I use. So the next step is we're going to be tying in our wing, and I took one of the parapost material. I'm just going to fold it in half, and I'm going to just stack it right here on the top, roughly so that it goes beyond our foam cylinder. And then I'll just do 2 to 3 wraps securing it in place, and then check it to make sure I like it. And I'll go ahead and trim out this tag end. And once you trim this out, be super careful not to pull this, because we only have the 3 wraps, and you can easily just pull it right out, and then you got to start over again. But then as we secure this with about 8 to 10 wraps, we're going to, then it will be nice and solid, and we're going to be super gluing this whole thing to make it really, really durable. And that is how I do it. But the key is here, we're going to be grabbing a little bit of super glue, and I'm just going to trim this wing. I went a little bit long. There we go. I like it. Just to extend a little bit beyond the foam body. But the key is, durability-wise, this is what I found to be most effective, is I'm just going to put a little dab of super glue in the center of everything we're doing there, and I'm going to tie in my Hackle first before we do that, and I'm just going to expose the end there so that it makes it easy to tie in. But the key, I've had a few of these fall apart until I started doing this, so I'm just going to take this z-cement, I'm going to put a little dab on there, and it's going to hold all those materials we just tied in place together. And then I'll put a dab on the bottom, and that is making that bulletproof. Now, if you're not comfortable wrapping the Hackle at this point, you got to be a little bit careful, because if you pull those rubber legs in or shift anything, it's going to stay, and you can't really manipulate your Hackle fibers with that wet super glue. And so I'm just wrapping these, spiraling forward with almost touching wraps, and I want about 4 to 5 wraps, and that is it. So it's a little tricky to do it wet, but once you get used to it, I found it to be super effective, because now that Hackle is bonded with that super glue, which is bonded with the wing, which is bonded with the foam, the rubber legs, and the thread, and thus to the shank. So just by doing that in that order and tying it in wet makes it just easy peasy pumpkin squeezy, and it's going to last many, many, many fish. And then I'll advance my thread underneath that foam head, get it to the hook eye. I'll do a 3-turn whip finish, and that glue is still could potentially be a little bit wet, so you want to be a little bit careful not to press too many materials. Notice how I'm not like stroking the fly at this point. I'm basically just holding those rubber legs up to expose that head, and you can let it dry and then whip finish, but it's a super quick fly. The last step is we're going to just trim these legs. Start by just separating the front, and then we'll trim them roughly the shank of the hook. If you're using a thinner leg, such as different materials, you could go a little bit longer, of course, but that's how I like it. And then we'll just trim this underbelly. I'm not trimming it flush. Another key trick here is make sure you don't get your scissors pressed up against that body in case the glue still is wet. So there's the Bionic ant. Tie them up in blacks and browns. That's what seems to work for me, and make sure you fish them. Thanks for watching.